Hey everybody, welcome to Nutri-iQ Radio, where we talk about all things food, fitness and feeling good. I'm your host Sean Hare, and this week we're talking all about the vegan diet. What it is, why you might choose to follow it, what it involves, why it's good for some things but not as good as we might expect for others, and a load of other stuff in between. Now, this is a big topic, and usually I follow a script that I've written word for word and read it out on the camera. But this week I've done it a little bit differently. I've got loads of notes and bullet points, and we're going to kind of wing our way through it, and we might have a little bit of back and forth on different points because they're all very sort of interrelated as we go. So let's see how that turns out. Before we get into it, you might be wondering, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, what's going on with Sean's face? Now, as I'm sure you're aware, we are now into November, which in certain parts of the world has become known as Movember, which is where men all around the world choose to grow a mustache to raise awareness for men's health issues such as prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and male suicide as well. Now, of course, just growing a mustache is one way for people to go, he's doing Movember, that's about those things, and that's where the awareness comes from. But there is the Movember Foundation or charity as well, where, as with any other charity event, you can donate and help to support the work being done to try and help with those issues, with the prostate cancer, the testicular cancer, and of course prevention of male suicide. It's all really important stuff. I'm going to be looking like this for the entire month. Some people think it looks creepy, but there we go. It just raises more awareness if you think exactly that. So if you would like to donate at any point this month or even after every one of these podcasts, I'll post a link to my Movember profile where you can go on there and donate to help support those causes. And if you do choose to do that, thank you very much in advance. Now let's get into the topic, and like I said, we might have a bit of up and down, back and forth as we go. Let's see how it goes. Before we get right into the topic, there is some important stuff we probably need to cover, and that's a little bit on the terminology, because even that isn't quite straight and defined. So the first thing is the term plant-based. Now, most people, when you say plant-based, immediately think of vegan, or at least the vegan diet, which means you only eat plants. But for me and many other people in the nutrition and health and fitness industries, that doesn't really make sense, because if you only ate plants, that would be a plant-only diet, right? And something you may often hear people say is that it's a good idea to follow a more plant-based diet. But if plant-based meant vegan, you can't get more vegan. You're either vegan, only eating plants, or you're not. So straight away, it's obvious that that term isn't quite defined and has one single definition. It kind of depends on who's using it and how they're using it. So for me, and in this podcast, as you're listening to it, if I ever say plant-based, that means more plants, or mostly plants, but still some animal products. Okay, so say for example, your typical day includes 5 animal products and 20 plant products. If you then tomorrow had 25 plant products and still those 5 animal products, that technically is a more plant-based diet, because you're having more plants compared to animals by ratio or percentage. That makes sense? Cool. So plant-based for us means plant-based, not plant-only. That's point number 1. Second one is also the term vegan diet, which I always find really interesting. And it's one we often forget, but if you're vegan, that means in your entire lifestyle, there are no animal products. So, for example, in your clothes, you don't wear leather shoes. In your car, you wouldn't have leather seats. It doesn't just relate to your diet, it relates to your entire life. So there is nothing that is derived from an animal in your life, right? Even I can't think of another example because I'm not vegan, but you hopefully get the idea. So again, when we say vegan diet, that does mean only plants. Okay, but for a lot of people, when they use the term vegan diet with someone who is fully vegan, it can be a bit demeaning, I think. We get some comments online from people who are fully vegan and say, oh, that shouldn't mean, a vegan diet doesn't really exist because it's just part of a whole lifestyle and that kind of thing. But for the purposes, again, of this podcast and keeping things simple, when we say vegan diet, we just mean there's no let's do that again. There's no animal products in your diet at all. Cool? Right then, let's get into what it's all about and all the different reasons why people might choose to go vegan, where it's beneficial, where it's not as beneficial as we think, and so on. So there are 4 main reasons why people might choose to go vegan. Now, there are other things as well, and again, these things kind of overlap and there are other things involved, but again, for simplicity, there are 4 main things we can think about. There's 4 main reasons people tend to choose to go vegan are weight loss, their health, the ethical argument, and the environmental argument. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to dig into each one of these individually, and again, you will see a bit of an overlap in different places, but it's probably simpler to try and keep those 4 things separate. So number 1, as we talk about with all of our other diet breakdowns, how does this diet relate to weight loss? Now, you might have tried this for yourself. You might have had friends who've tried this to lose weight and maybe not seen results, or maybe you have. And that's always the question. Well, if Jenny got results, but I didn't, but we followed the same diet, what's going on? Surely if it creates weight loss, it should always create weight loss. Well, as we've learned in previous episodes, that's not always the case. And the reason for that is we have to remember that all weight loss occurs as a result of creating a calorie deficit. Now, just as a quick recap, in case you're new to the show, or it's always just good to have a little refresher anyway, what that means, what a calorie deficit means, is calories are just energy. Okay? A calorie just measures an amount of energy like a minute measures an amount of time. It's just a unit. Okay? So when we talk about calories, we're really just talking about energy. Now, our bodies like energy. Our bodies run on energy. And so it's a precious resource. If we give our bodies a lot of energy, we eat a lot of food, essentially, we consume a lot of calories. If we consume more calories, more energy than our bodies need day to day to function, then our bodies will store that energy just in case they need it in the future when we don't have enough food to get it as we go along. Okay? That's where we gain fat, because that energy gets stored as fat. We call this being in a calorie surplus. On the flip side, if we then want to use up those fat cells, get rid of those fat cells, use up the energy stored in those fat cells, what we need to do is use more energy each day than we're consuming. And we can either do that by reducing the amount of calories we are consuming or increasing the amount of energy we're putting out. So essentially reducing your calorie intake or being more active are the 2 main sides to the equation. That's what we call being in a calorie deficit. The state where you're using more energy day to day than you're consuming from your food and drinks. So that's weight loss. That's how it works. So how does the vegan diet relate to that? Well, when you become more aware of your diet in general, you tend to make better choices. Now, studies show people who don't make any specific changes to their diet, it's not kind of prescribed in any way, but all they do for the purposes of the study are to keep a food diary, to keep a track of what they're eating. People then tend to make better choices. When we're more aware of what we're doing, we can then make changes to what we're doing. We often don't realize how much we're eating or how many biscuits we're having or how many milkshakes we're drinking until we write it down and see it on paper. So when we just generally become more aware of our diet, we tend to immediately make better choices. If you go vegan, you're by definition almost automatically becoming more diet conscious. as we call it, you have to think about it more. It's not as easy as just going out and grabbing whatever's on the shelf, because whatever's on the shelf isn't sort of allowed or isn't within the boundaries of what you're able to eat based on your new decision of the lifestyle you're going to follow. So straight away, by becoming more diet conscious, as in the case with the food diaries, you will make better choices. You will reduce your calorie intake or sort of control it a little bit more just based on that. You have to think about new things to cook. You have to find new recipes and all of that. Now, if you are thinking of going vegan and you're wondering, well, what do I cook? What am I supposed to cook? What meals are there if I'm going to go vegan? The Nutri-iQ app can help you do that. So when you set up your Nutri-iQ app, you can let us know if you're vegan, vegetarian, polotarian, pescatarian, polopescatarian, ovo-vegetarian, lacto-vegetarian, even vegan, which is where you're vegan but you eat honey. You can let us know about that, and then we'll only show you recipes that are relevant to that, so you can build your perfect meal plan that's also relevant to your lifestyle. If you want to do that, of course, we'll post a link into the description to help you find and get started with the Nutri-iQ app. But moving on from there, as we were saying, if you go vegan, automatically more diet conscious, more likely to make better choices. Now, at the same time, those choices are limited in terms of calorie dense foods. So if you've listened to our previous diet breakdowns, you'll know that a lot of the time when somebody starts a new diet, whether it's keto or what are the ones we've covered so far? I'm struggling to think what we've done and what's in the pipeline. I'm pretty sure we've done Weight Watchers as well. When you follow those things, you cut out junk, essentially. You cut out those calorie dense, highly processed, super palatable, easily digested and eaten and overeaten foods. When you cut those out, your calorie intake goes down massively because of how those foods are made. Now, there's not a lot of foods like that are suitable for vegans on the shelves. Think about all of your chocolate bars. They contain milk. That's gone if you're vegan. Think about, there's so many things. Even Haribo, right? Haribo sweets, you have to get a certain one for them to be vegan friendly because they're made, I think it's using gelatin is the ingredient that isn't vegan friendly. So again, simple sweets like Haribo, you're not allowed on a vegan diet because they contain animal products. If you're cutting out all of these calorie dense junk sweet candy of your American foods, again, you're immediately going to be reducing your calorie intake, and that is going to contribute towards creating that calorie deficit to incur weight loss, as we mentioned earlier. As you said, most junk food is not vegan friendly. Even wine actually contains animal products or uses animal products during its production. So if you're vegan or vegetarian and you didn't know that, I'm really sorry, but yeah, that's the case. You can, of course, still get vegan friendly wines and vegetarian friendly wines, but that's another one to be aware of. So even drinks can involve animal products during their production that we don't realize. And again, wine, alcohol, things that are easily drank and consumed calories with. So again, if we're cutting those things out, going to be hitting that calorie deficit, more likely to be losing weight. So a combination of eating more plants, which are much less calorie dense than most animal products in terms of foods. You're going to be reducing your intake of calorie dense snacks as well. That means overall you're more likely to end up in a calorie deficit. But as with most diets, that's not guaranteed. Okay, so just because it's more likely doesn't mean it definitely will happen. You can still overeat on anything if you really want to. And the issue we might start running into on the weight loss side of things is that you got to remember food companies exist to make money. All those food products, all that junk food we've already talked about cutting out when you go vegan, those food companies don't want to miss out on your money because you've gone vegan. And that's why we're seeing more and more products starting to hit the shelves from these companies that are vegan friendly. We're starting to see more vegan friendly treats, more vegan friendly sweets and snacks and all the things you typically have had before. but now vegan friendly. And of course, these are also calorie dense because of how they're made. And that's something, as I said, to start to become aware of. Also formulated to be delicious, irresistible, and basically addictive. So that calorie deficit many people do manage to achieve by going vegan might not be so likely anymore as a result of this. Like I said, bear that in mind. If your goal is to lose weight, then yeah, eating more nutrient-dense foods in general does help. But that doesn't mean you'll get results just by doing that. You still have to create that calorie deficit. A vegan diet may well help you to create a calorie deficit, but as we said, it's not guaranteed. You still need to be aware of that overall calorie intake in some way. So, point number 2 then. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody in terms of weight loss. Now, in terms of health, this is what we're going to move on to now. This is probably the next big reason people choose to go vegan, because they want to improve their health and they know that eating more plants is beneficial. So, back in episode 14, we talked about the difference between health and weight loss. Now, if you haven't listened to that episode yet, you can find a link to that as well in the description. In that episode, we learned that we tend to conflate weight loss and health because one does often tend to happen alongside the other. And the reason for this is because of something we've already mentioned. When we reduce junk food and increase nutrient-dense food, when people follow whatever kind of diet they choose to follow, we tend to create a calorie deficit and weight loss occurs as a result. But reducing junk foods and increasing nutrient-dense foods also means we're nourishing our bodies with more essential nutrients than we were before. And then that is where those health improving effects come from. Well, that and the fact that you're also cutting out the junk food, so you're not going to be having the detrimental to health effects of those foods, right? So as we said there, the same action, reducing junk food, increasing nutrient-dense food, produces two different effects, two different beneficial effects, depending on your perspective. Now, I don't need to tell you, right, that plants are good for you. I'm sure your parents have been telling you that since before you could talk and walk. But saying that, you might have heard some people on the opposite end of this plant-based spectrum claiming that plants are actually bad for you. In case you haven't heard yet, the Carnivore Diet is a thing now. Yeah, people eating just meat. Nothing, just meat, right? Just let that sink in for a second. It's a bit mad. These people often also see improvements in their health though. So you might be thinking, well, how does that work if a vegan diet improves health? Now, these people do see health improvements from things like skin conditions clearing up to their digestive issues settling down. But here's the thing. If all they're eating is meat, then once again, they're also cutting out all the junk food. And animal products are nutritious too, right? There's loads of vitamin A, for example, in red meat. So those people following a carnivore diet see health improvements for the exact same reason somebody switching to a vegan diet would. It's just that one side blames the meat they've cut out while the other blames the plants they've cut out, when in fact it's far more likely to be the thing they've both cut out. But is it really healthy to live solely on plants, or solely on meat for that matter? We're going to have to bring in a new word for this part of the discussion, and that word is optimal. You can survive on a vegan diet or a carnivore diet, but you will have to take some kind of supplements to ensure you're getting everything you need, because some nutrients we only get from plants and some nutrients we only get from animals. We're omnivores. We have the ability to digest and absorb food from both plants and animals. That's part of the reason why we've become the dominant species on the planet. Some would claim we're supposed to be vegan because we have much longer digestive systems than carnivores, which enables us to digest plants, which is true, But we also have much shorter digestive systems than herbivores, which means we don't digest plants as well as they do. In the recent Game Changers documentary you might have seen, an example of a gorilla was used. The point they made was this: a gorilla only eats plants, and they're super strong. A gorilla could kill you in a second, so you should only eat plants too. And that's true. A gorilla would kill me in a second, but so would a lion. Just ask that guy who lost an arm in Tiger King, right? So that example kind of doesn't work. A gorilla has a much longer digestive system than we do, so it can absorb more nutrients from those plants that it's eating. We can't absorb as many as it can. That's why even if you get the same amount of protein intake on a vegan diet as you did before you went vegan, you won't actually be absorbing the same amount of protein from that food because your digestive system can't do it. As mentioned, we are omnivores. If you drop out one of those sources, either plants or animals, you will develop nutrient deficiencies. Now, when we get to the nutrient deficiencies part of the conversation, you'll often hear claims that someone has been following a vegan diet for ages and they don't take supplements and they're fine. And that's great. But the thing is, nutrient deficiencies take a long time to develop and even longer to show symptoms. Remember, guys, our bodies are unbelievably clever. And if something isn't coming in, it can survive on alternatives until we get that thing again, hence the keto diet. But in terms of micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, we can only do that for so long. And the good news is that it only takes a tiny amount of these vitamins and minerals to avoid a full-blown deficiency. And people who follow a vegan or carnivore diet often tend to stray into the opposite realm from time to time, especially when they're drunk. It might only be one chicken nugget or a single banana, but that one little thing could be enough to stave off those deficiency symptoms for another few months. Now, if you're listening to this and you are vegan and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I've never had any kind of animal product for years, that's fine. Like this might not be you. But in surveys, when people are more honest because there's not a person looking at them on the other side, a lot of people do this. I've known people in the past who do this, and we all make jokes, but it's just part of what it is, right? It's just the way things are. So overall, is it healthy to follow a vegan diet? Well, it's certainly healthier to eat more plants, but to only eat plants, I wouldn't say that's optimal because it does require you to make use of supplements in some way to keep you at your absolute best. Now, let's move on to our third point, the ethical side of things, which of course is another huge one. And these are all really delicate subjects, right? And I hope I don't say something that's taken the wrong way. If I do say something that you might take the wrong way, I'm not trying to, okay? So just remember that. I don't think I am, but just to cover our bases there. So some of the conditions animals are kept in certain types of almonds are undeniably atrocious. And those conditions actually do affect the nutrition that gets passed on to us, right? And that's really interesting. If you didn't know that, the condition an animal is kept in affects the condition of the food it provides to you if you're an animal product consumer or a non-vegan is the simpler way to say that. Look at eggs, right? Go to the shop, get yourself a little 6-pack of caged eggs, and then get yourself a 6-pack of free range or organic eggs, right? Break a caged egg into a bowl and break an organic or free range egg into a different bowl, and you'll see the difference straight away. The yolk is a completely different color. Okay, it's much deeper. It's much more orange in a free range egg than it is in a caged one. And that's all to do with the stress of the animal. And just like us, we need to keep hold of what we've got if we're under stress, just like we keep hold of our body fat if we're not, just in case we need it in the future. that's what's going on with these animals as well. And so again, that kind of comes back to the health side of things. If you want animals to be treated well, that and you continue to eat animals too, that's actually going to benefit you in your nutrition. But that's a kind of a side note, just an interesting thing you might want to know. Let's go back to the ethics of things in the vegan diet. If you don't want any large animals to die for your sustenance, then yeah, of course, you're going to go vegan. But if you want those animals to simply be treated better, then choosing free range eggs, as we just mentioned, or going direct to farmers is another option if that's possible for you. Now, notice there I said large animals. In any traditional farming that we have these days, with the big machinery that we use now, insects are killed and smaller things like rabbits get caught up in the machinery. So then that's where the argument starts to get complicated. It's all well and good, not eating big animals, not getting a packet of chicken off the shelf, for example. But if the farming practices also kill animals by accident as they do it, how does that come into the conversation for you? Right? And I'm not, saying anything on this like, it's blissful ignorance on your point, isn't it? If you're vegan, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's something we have to think about. It's something that we often forget to think about. Blissful ignorance is often blissful for a reason. But if the ethical argument is your main argument for wanting to go vegan, then that's something you kind of need to be aware of. That's something where this is where it's going to relate into the environmental side. You may need to go more in on the growing your own veg, on the growing your own food kind of side of things. Like I say, if the ethical one is a big one for you, because no matter what you do in any kind of major farm, insecticides are used, insects are killed so that the crops aren't. Like the insects, not as important as those bigger animals. Are the little rabbits that get caught up in the machinery not as important as the chickens on the farm? Again, I don't have an answer. It's just something to think about. It's part of that conversation. How big does the animal need to be before it's unacceptable? Just something to think about. And this podcast, because it's just me, there's nobody on the other side of this answering my question or debating, but it will be good to do that. If you know somebody who would enjoy debating these kinds of things and, just seeing what comes out, let them know. We'll get them on the show. We'll have a chat. So yeah, the ethical side of things, there's lots to go into. I can't really go any further into it than this. But all that being said, there are new farming practices, even newer farming practices coming hopefully sooner rather than later to the mainstream that could change all of that. Which brings us on to our fourth and final part, which is the environmental side of things. Now, a few weeks back on episode, let's see, I believe it was episode 20. A few weeks back on episode 20, we talked all about how you can make a few dietary changes to help save the world. And that came off the back of the new David Attenborough documentary that came out a few weeks ago on Netflix. Here's the situation. We as a species are destroying the planet. There is no argument on that. That is not a debate. That is what is happening. We're causing deforestation in huge numbers, in huge areas. We're overfishing the seas. We're massively reducing the amount of wildlife that just exists on the planet. And if we don't change things in some way, the whole planet is one big ecosystem, and we're part of that. If we destroy the rest of the ecosystem, we get destroyed as well. It's not nice to think about, but it's what's going to happen, right? Now, as I've said, we are basically destroying the planet. I don't know where you're listening to this in the world, and I don't know what your politicians might try to convince you of, but climate change is happening fast. We know it happens because of the carbon we've been pumping into the atmosphere for decades now. But here's the thing, if we make the planet we live on uninhabitable for ourselves, the planet doesn't care. We'll die out, or we'll just be massively reduced in numbers because we won't have anywhere to live because sea levels rise, and that means, all the places we've built to live will get covered in water. And if we go down, we'll take a bunch of other species with us. But the planet will just carry on. New life will spring from it. Things will be taken over. Have you seen what Chernobyl looks like now? It's really interesting. Chernobyl, the place where there was the biggest nuclear disaster of history, it's covered in plants now. It's covered in plant life. There are animals, in the streets because the people aren't there anymore. And mind you, saying that, the same thing happened in lockdown. We saw videos of dolphins in Venice. We saw sheep just taking over cities because I don't even know where those sheep came from. But yeah, wildlife just came back. And that's what would happen if we continue to do what we're doing and ruin the planet. The animals, the planet will just keep going without us. It doesn't really care. We're the ones that need to care. So, the main things we talked about in that previous episode that, if you go and listen to it, you'll find out more on, is that really following a more plant-based diet and, following a vegan diet as well will help to improve and change the impact that we're having on the planet. Essentially, every meat eater requires, I can't remember the exact number, basically 10 times the amount of space because of how the food chain works than a herbivore does, right? And 7-8 billion meat eaters, the planet really doesn't have enough space for all that, especially in the amount that we currently consume meat. Going vegan, eating more plants, eating fewer animals, shifts that balance to how much land we require. And if we change the balance of how much land we require, that means we don't need to cut down as many trees. That means we don't need to do as much farming. That means we don't need to over farm the soil and destroy the nutrients within it, right? On top of that, even if you don't go fully vegan, if you reduced your animal product intake, if you went and ate more fish, there are lots of things that we can do as a species, as humans, to make fishing responsibly sourced and sustainably farmed as well. So we can help to regrow fish populations so that there's enough for us to eat as well. So even if you're worried, as we mentioned before, that you're not going to get enough protein by following a vegan diet or a more plant-based diet, if we do the right things, we make the right choices with the food that we buy, in terms of fish, for example, you'll get more protein from that, you'll get all your omega-3s, and you'll help the planet along the way as well by doing that. So again, if you want to find out more about all of the environmental side of things, head back to episode 20, and again, I'll post a link in the description for that episode to find out more. Overall then, let's start to wrap it up. The vegan diet can help you lose weight as long as you achieve a calorie deficit by doing it. But just like with every other diet, that calorie deficit isn't automatic, especially with all the new vegan-friendly snacks and products that are being created more and more at the minute. The vegan diet can also help to improve your health because you're increasing nutrient-dense foods and reducing those calorie-dense junk foods at the same time. But it's not totally optimal for health because we are omnivores. If you want to do it right, in terms of being vegan, it takes a good amount of planning to make sure you're getting everything you need as best as you can, and then also supplementing if and where you need to. When it comes to the ethical and environmental reasons, that is totally personal choice, but I will say this. Since watching that new David Attenborough documentary on Netflix about the state of the planet, how we've caused it and what we can do about it, I am planning to reduce my animal intake and increasing my plant intake. I'm not 100% decided on how I'm going to do that yet, but maybe I'll start with a meat-free Monday, Or maybe because I do food prep for my lunches at work, I'll keep them as they are, just mainly chicken, load of veg, and a bit of rice. And I'll go meat free for my evening meals. Either way, I'm going to be using loads of the vegan recipes from the Nutri-iQ app. Remember, if you're following XYZ diet or are planning to, but you're struggling to think of meal ideas, you can filter your meals in the Nutri-iQ app to only show recipes that meet your lifestyle choices and dietary needs. You can get started with the Nutri-iQ app for free by going to nutri-iq.net or by clicking the link to the Nutri-iQ app in the description below. I want to get your thoughts on the vegan diet. Is it a lifestyle you've chosen to follow? And if so, how are you finding it? If it's something you've dabbled with and decided it wasn't for you, why was that? And whether you're following the lifestyle right now, you've had a go at it, or it's something you're thinking of trying, which of those 4 main reasons we've talked about is behind the decision for you? If you're listening as a podcast, send an email to sean@nutri-iq.net and use the subject line podcast to let us know your story. That's SHAUN@NUTRI-IQ.net. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, just let us know down below. So thanks for tuning in to Nutri-iQ Radio this week. If you're listening as a podcast and you haven't already, if you could leave a review on iTunes, that would be fantastic. And you can even do that right in the app. Now when I say iTunes, I mean Apple Podcasts. It's changed. I keep forgetting until I've said it. Any reviews you leave, I'd love to give you a shout out on this show. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, if you could give the video a like, that will be a massive help because it lets those guys know that these shows are something people enjoy, so they're then more likely to show them to other people. And finally, if you want to follow us around social media, make sure you like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram at Nutri-iQ without the dash, follow us on Twitter at Nutri-iQ official, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Nutri-iQ TV. See you next week.